The hedgerows had finally thinned into open country when the traffic jam took on a life of its own. It is Friday, 1st September 1944, near the Moselle River. Dust hangs above a two-lane road like low fog. A jeep pulls to the shoulder as a line of olive-drab trucks thunders past, each with a red ball stencil on the bumper. The drivers sit high, goggles on, sleeves rolled, their faces gray with dust. A military policeman swings his arm in a steady rhythm, keeping the corridor clear. Beyond a rise, tanks of the 4th Armored Division idle, waiting for fuel cans and rations to arrive before they try another push toward Nancy. Everything depends on gasoline and tires, grease and water, spark plugs and batteries, the small parts that convert intent into movement. The men in the tanks watch the trucks. The trucks keep coming. To the east, on a contour line barely visible through the haze, German observers mark the American bridgeheads over the Moselle. The Wehrmacht has pulled back from the Seine and the Marne, and now clings to the rivers of Lorraine. American armor has outrun its stockpiles. If the trucks do not make it, the advance ends here. A battalion commander rubs his eyes and looks at the map. A staff sergeant counts jerry cans, then counts again. Somewhere behind them, a colonel writes a message. Delay attack. Awaiting POL. Gasoline has become the new artillery. The road becomes the front. For weeks, the American advance has looked effortless on a wall map. Thick blue arrows sweep from Saint-Lô to Avranches, across Brittany's base, and then hard to the east. But on the ground, the blue arrows have a weight. To keep a single armored division moving 100 miles in combat takes a lake of fuel, a mountain of tires, and roads that do not collapse under steel weight. Every hour, engines drink. Every mile, tracks shed rubber. Every night, mechanics strip 3 dead trucks to keep 2 living. There are no shortcuts left. There is only the road. In the dust and noise, a convoy officer checks his watch. The order is simple. No stopping, no passing, no lights at night. The road is one way, and the trucks must roll. A driver tastes grit and thinks about sleep, then downshifts and climbs another hill. They call the network the Red Ball Express, and it has become the difference between pause and pursuit. Without it, Third Army's armor is a static museum of steel. With it, a river line is only a brief, necessary inconvenience. The stakes are measured in miles per day, gallons per hour, and tons per 24-hour cycle. The trucks crest the rise, horns chirp, and 1,000 small logistics miracles continue to stitch speed to power. The German staff culture prized fighting spirit and the decisive counterstroke. They believed material mattered, but not as much as iron will and elastic defense. In briefings and mess halls, American armies were often described as clumsy and dependent on overland supply. Even Allied officers feared a pursuit would choke on its own logistics. Yet by late August, a new contest emerged: system versus spirit. Could interlocked logistics, planning rhythms, and an industrial pipeline overpower battle skill and local counterattacks? Here is the thesis. German field generals expected American columns to slow once they left the beaches. Once railheads and depots fell behind, and hedgerow lanes gave way to long, underbuilt roads. What happened instead was a mobile theater fed by trucks, engineer repairs, portable pipelines, and flexible air support. The Red Ball Express did not win firefights. It made them possible, and it made them continuous. It gave Patton and his corps the only currency that matters in a pursuit: uninterrupted movement. The paradox is central. The side that avoided the enemy's chosen style of battle, slow, positional fights, won by imposing a system of motion backed by numbers that never lost their rhythm. The summer of 1944 had turned from breakout to chase. Operation Cobra, launched on 25 July, cracked the bocage and created a gap at Avranches by the end of the month. Through that gap moved columns of armor and trucks, first swinging west to sever Brittany's base, then pivoting east as German formations reeled from Mortain and the Falaise encirclement. Rail lines were wrecked. Ports were either in ruins or still held. The Allied plan depended on speed before the enemy could reform behind major rivers. Every day saved in August was a day not paid with blood in October. Geography mattered. So did time. The Seine crossings opened the road to Paris and beyond. But speed burned fuel and wore out rubber. The farther the columns drove, the longer the resupply tail grew, and the more the beaches of Normandy looked like a distant island. The Allied command faced an arithmetic of distance. Ports were not yet available in the required numbers. Rail repair teams worked, but bridges were down in dozens of places. Truck transport had to carry the load until Antwerp and the rail net could take over. This was the strategic gamble. Accept risk in distribution now to exploit a rare window before the Wehrmacht could seal the rivers. The German doctrine of August 1944 rested on a few assumptions. First, that American formations could be baited into set-piece fights far from their depots, and that fuel starvation would force an operational pause. Second, that terrain and weather would favor the defense once the Seine was behind them and the Moselle and Meuse in front. Third, that fresh panzer brigades could cut into armored spearheads if they found them dispersed at daybreak or crossing streams. These beliefs had logic. The road net in northern France had not been designed for 2 1-2-ton trucks in endless columns. Bridges were old and often fragile. Tracked vehicles chewed roads to powder. A handful of roadblocks, a blown culvert, a few accurate artillery fires could snarl a route for hours. And the Germans still held the inside lines. They could shift reserves shorter distances and fight from villages they knew well. They had seen the American army move heavy piles of ammunition to an artillery chute, and then slow when distances stretched. The Wehrmacht's ideal fight would be outside towns, with panzers in ambush and infantry covering hedges and orchards. Disrupt the road, strike the point, kill the fuel trucks, and watch the advance lose its tempo. If a corps stalled for 48 hours, bridges could be wired, fields flooded, and the Moselle turned into a temporary wall. The German bet was that spirit and cunning could make road distances do the rest. They could not outproduce, but perhaps they could outlast. The American answer was not a speech. It was a design philosophy. The U.S. Army that landed in Normandy had been built to coordinate air, artillery, and armor with reliable communications and an obsession with supply. Infantry regiments carried radios at every level. Tanks had radios as standard. Artillery battalions trained to answer calls within minutes. The 2 1-2-ton truck, the Jimmy, and the 1 4-ton Jeep formed a moving skeleton for everything else. Maintenance was doctrine, not an afterthought. The idea was simple. If parts flow and fuel are steady, then flexible commanders can choose the fight, avoid stalemates, and exploit openings with speed. At sea, the pipeline began with Liberty ships and tankers unloading at Normandy beaches and ports like Cherbourg. On land, engineer units rebuilt roads and bridges, while service troops pushed depots forward every few days. In the air, 19th Tactical Air Command flew cover for Patton's columns, pounced on German moves in daylight, and cut bridges and rail yards to deny the enemy easy lateral motion. Radios tied this together. Armored divisions could call artillery, air, and resupply with speed. A single decision in a Corps HQ could move hundreds of trucks within hours. The kit was rugged, standardized, mass-produced. The whole point was to make velocity sustainable. The first contact case that shows the pattern came as August turned to September. Third Army pushed for the Moselle crossings around Nancy and Metz, while fuel receipts lagged behind hungry engines. In the last week of August and the first days of September, the Army's gasoline intake averaged about 200,000 gallons per day, well below demand for continuous operations. Attacks had to be timed with fuel arrivals. Cancellations rippled down the line when a convoy slipped or a route clogged. German defenders sensed the slack and counterattacked where they could. The fight became a race between trucks and river lines. Tactically, U.S. units kept their fights short, violent, and mobile. A battalion crossed at dawn, seized high ground, and radioed for smoke and artillery. Engineers lashed treadway bridges while tank destroyers watched the flanks. When German guns opened, air support called by forward controllers hunted firing batteries and road columns. The rhythm was not flawless. Bridgeheads were lost and won again. But the method, even under fuel stress, kept pushing the line forward whenever gasoline and ammunition arrived on schedule. This was logistics as tempo. The enemy wanted time to harden the Moselle. Time never quite arrived. Yet the American system carried a flaw that German assumptions hoped to exploit. If fuel distribution fell behind by a day or two, the attackers paused just long enough for panzer counterattacks to matter. On some days in early September, Patton's formations received far less fuel than they needed. The numbers vary, but the effect was the same. Idle tanks, delayed crossings, and a sudden vulnerability to a sharp armored thrust. This is where the Red Ball Express mattered most. The convoys turned a brittle pursuit into a resilient one by giving the front a predictable daily floor. The days without were fewer. The days with full rations of gasoline returned. The turning point set piece came in the rolling farmland near Aricourt, southeast of Nancy, between 18 and 29 September 1944. Fog lay thick on many mornings. German 5th Panzer Army, through Panzer Brigades 111 and 113, with Panthers and Mark IVs, against elements of the U.S. 4th Armored Division. The German plan aimed to crush American outposts at dawn, roll up thinly spread combat commands, and puncture the crossings. The Americans, short of fuel at moments but backed by a growing flow of supplies and aggressive air cover, used radio-directed artillery and flexible defense to blunt each thrust. On one day near Juvisy, Company A of 37th Tank Battalion attacked 20-plus enemy tanks, lost one, and claimed a high tally in return. The pattern repeated across ridgelines and villages. Fog would lift, P-47s from 19 Tactical Air Command would find columns and hit them hard, while tank destroyers and Shermans used short bounds to flank stalled German assaults. Over the 2 weeks, German units lost around 200 tanks, and assault guns destroyed or disabled, while U.S. losses in medium tanks hovered near 40+, with additional light tanks and tank destroyers damaged or lost. Numbers vary by source, but the outcome is stable. The attempt to cut Third Army failed decisively. The American system of fires, scouts, radios, and logistics created local superiority at each point of contact. Aricourt also showed the German dilemma. They could concentrate armor, but not fuel and maintenance in equal measure. Their brigades often attacked piecemeal, delayed by fog and map errors, and arrived with limited artillery support. American columns, though occasionally thin on gasoline, had predictable resupply windows thanks to the truck corridors. The Red Ball Express was not driving to the front line firing positions, but it kept depots close enough for divisions to draw daily. That was enough. The battles were decided in hours, not days, because the side with steady inputs could choose to fight only when conditions suited them. The other side had to attack on the timetable of desperation. What made the Red Ball Express different was not only mass, but design. It was a closed-loop, one-way highway system, enforced by military police, kept clear of unrelated traffic. It began operating in late August 1944 and ran until mid-November, about 80-plus days. At peak, nearly 6,000 trucks carried on the order of 12,000 tons per day to forward depots, with the first several days ramping from roughly 3,300 trucks and 4,500 tons to almost double that. About three-quarters of the drivers were African-American soldiers of the Motor Transport Service. The route formally started near Saint-Lô, with pickups reaching back toward Cherbourg. Outbound and inbound legs together ran on the order of 300 miles. The rules were strict: no stopping, no passing, limited lights, rigorous maintenance cycles. It was a moving factory floor, and its product was miles per day. Inside the sausage factory, the math was relentless. If an armored division needed more than 180,000 gallons to move 100 miles in combat conditions, then every lost convoy hour had a predictable cost in canceled attacks and exposed bridgeheads. Mechanics in truck parks used cannibalized parts to keep the two 1-to-2-tonners in a 24-hour rhythm. Drivers ran triple shifts on little sleep, navigating by blackout markers and memorized curves. Military police units blocked farm lanes and village squares to maintain the one-way flow. Engineers patched potholes and reinforced culverts, while convoys rolled past their shoulders. Each piece was ordinary on its own. Together, they formed a system that converted American industrial depth into tactical fuel at a rate the enemy could not match. Above the road, the air picture mattered. Nye, Tactical Air Command under General Otto P. Wayland, flew a flexible cover over Third Army, using forward air controllers and pre-briefed strips to hit German columns and gun lines. When fog lifted at Eracourt, P-47s battered German armor. When American units radioed artillery, air and ground fires together, German commanders complained that every move drew punishment within minutes. Intelligence fused from aerial reconnaissance, road watch teams, and radio intercepts gave Corps commanders the confidence to advance when the supply meter was green and to pause when it dipped. The front did not outrun its brain because radios linked scouts to guns and to the pipeline. Human capital closed the loop. American tank crews trained in gunnery, radio procedure, and maintenance cycles that kept platoons coherent across long days. Truck drivers learned road discipline fast, or they left the route. Many Red Ball drivers were under 24, new to heavy vehicles, and learned while rolling under pressure. Their casualty risk was real. Accidents, fatigue, enemy air if caught, and the simple danger of long convoys at night. On the German side, replacement crews were often short on training hours and thrown into new Panthers with thin cohesion. An army's skill is not a generic quality. It is a function of how many repetitions its people have done before a cold morning when fog lifts and everything must work at once. Doctrine followed the numbers. Third Army tried hard to avoid the enemy's preferred fight in dense villages without artillery prep or air cover. Instead, it used feints, quick crossings, and bounding overwatch by tanks and TDs to force German units to expose themselves. If a crossing stalled, the answer was often to shift 2 miles upriver at dusk, build a new bridge, and attack at first light with artillery and air standing by. The intent was to keep German formations off balance and to shorten any firefight that turned attritional. This is why logistics mattered more here than in many earlier fights. The doctrine relied on the ability to try again somewhere else within hours. Only fuel and tires made that repeatable. None of this denies the moments when German formations fought well. In Lorraine, weather cut American air power for hours at a time. German guns and Panthers ambushed American columns in fog and hedgerows. Metz became a stubborn fortress fight that consumed weeks and much ammunition. The German counterattacks at Eracourt, though defeated, caused losses in tanks and men that the U.S. units felt keenly. And logistics superiority did not make every road easy. Bridges collapsed. Depots burned. A system reduces risk. It never eliminates it. The numbers roll-up tells the story plainly. Red Ball Express operated roughly from 25th of August to 16th of November, 1944, for about 83 days. At peak, it ran 5,958 vehicles, delivering around 12,500 tons per day to forward depots. About 73 to 75% of its drivers were African American. Its route formed a closed loop of roughly 300 miles, with the outbound leg starting near St. Lo and pickups as far as Cherbourg as needed. In the period 26th August 2nd September, Third Army's gasoline receipts averaged around 202,000 gallons day versus demand on the order of 350,000, 400,000 gallons day to sustain broad front mobile operations. At Arracourt, 18 to 29 September, German tank and assault gun losses were on the order of 200 destroyed or disabled, against U.S. losses around 41 medium tanks plus several light tanks and tank destroyers. The exact figures vary, but the ratios favor the side whose fires and fuel lines held their timing across many small fights. Psychologically, this created a quiet collapse at the operational level. German diaries and reports described American artillery and air as omnipresent once the sun broke through. More telling is what they noted about tempo. American units seemed able to shift directions quickly and resume attacks after short pauses. To a battalion on a ridge, it felt like fighting a spring that always returned to shape after compression. Patrols at night found new bridges where none had been the day before. Road columns lost their nerve when fighter-bombers roared low in the afternoon. The cumulative effect was not a single decisive charge, but a steady draining of initiative. An army that cannot plan 6 hours ahead without being interrupted is an army that is losing. In the American command post, the mood was not triumphal. Staffs counted gallons, tires, and engine hours like a banker counts cash. When Patton wrote that his advance had been checked by gasoline, it was not a rhetorical flourish. It was the central operational fact of early September. The Red Ball Express widened the window in which Third Army could act each day. It did not remove the constraints. When Antwerp opened and pipelines reached forward, the trucks finally gave way to a more efficient system. But during the moment, when it mattered most, the drivers kept the arrows moving on the map. The next 3 months saw the shape of the campaign change. Metz fell after a hard siege as November set in. Antwerp's port finally fed the Allied armies, and rail lines improved enough to carry the tonnage that trucks had been moving. Pipelines brought Pole forward with fewer losses and less labor. The Red Ball Express ended in mid-November, its mission complete. The army that had sprinted in August had learned to sustain in winter. At the same time, the stage was set for the Ardennes surprise. Yet the logistics base created in autumn helped absorb the shock of December. Systems built in August and September, command habits, maintenance shops, depots, paid dividends well beyond their original purpose. Ethically, speed came with costs. French civilians lived beside the one-way roads and saw their lanes choked. With trucks, their villages shaken by endless convoys, their bridges rebuilt to military specification. Accidents and fatigue took lives on both sides of the windscreen. African-American soldiers did hazardous, exhausting work under segregation policies that denied them equal credit and advancement. They kept the route open, with courage rarely recorded in unit citations. A clear account includes these facts and honors the burden without sensationalism. The legacy is doctrine. Post-war U.S. Army thinking treated logistics not as a staff specialty alone, but as a weapon that shapes the enemy's choices. The idea of a closed logistics corridor, controlled by traffic discipline, military police, and standardized maintenance, carried into Korea and beyond. The system-first outlook also influenced how radios, forward air control, and artillery fire direction evolved. Faster loops, clearer procedures, and training that simulated the friction of long road nets. At the institutional level, the lesson was blunt. You can buy striking power in peacetime, but you must train a distribution network to spend it. Engineers, MP units, truck companies, and depots moved closer to the center of planning. As for the cultural memory, the Red Ball Express remained both a technical case study and a human story. The numbers impress because they show what organization can do under pressure. The faces matter because young men who had never driven a truck before the war learned to run a 300-mile loop without lights, at speed, every day, for almost 3 months. That is not a statistic. It is a commitment repeated every hour of every night that autumn. Return to the road near the Moselle. The trucks still roll. A tanker backs into a makeshift depot. Crews fill cans and sling them into half-tracks, then tanks. Engines cough, then settle into a steady thrum. A battalion commander watches his. Fuel board turns from red to green and gives the signal to move. The road clears, the column forms, and the line on the map starts to bend east again. The final metaphor is simple. Spirit picks the target. System carries it there. In Lorraine, it was the Red Ball Express that turned a good plan into a moving reality. The enemy waited for logistics to fail. The trucks told them otherwise.